Hi, and welcome to ReallyLearnGuitar.com, and this is Jeff's Tip of the Week. This week we're going to talk about a couple of things of setting up your equipment. We're going to talk about setting up a pedal board, and then plugging your guitar into that, and getting your amp and everything to work together. And then we're going to talk about another one called an effects loop. So very simply put, you have your pedal board set up, and what happens is there's a series or a path that the guitar signal needs to follow. And that's typically marked by the sayings input or instrument, it'll be INST, and then there'll be an output or amp. And those are just different variations on each pedal. So what happens first is we take our cable, and this is the cable that would be coming realistically from the guitar. So if you visualize hooking the black cable into the guitar, comes out of the guitar and into our first pedal, into the input of the first pedal, and then you'll need another wire coming from the output that leads into the input of the next effect. And then you'll need another wire leading from the output of that to the input of the next, and so on down the chain until you get all the way down the line and have all of your effects hooked up. Then from the last pedal's output, it will come back and we will hook the final cable, which is going to be this red cable here, and we're going to hook that into the front of the amp. Just like that. So your signal path should just flow all the way around the line into the front of the amp. And once it gets there, you can turn your amplifier on and it should work. Now once you get that going, you'll want to make sure and go down the line and check each pedal to make sure the lights all come on, and make sure every pedal is powered. Now a troubleshooting thing with pedals is if they're not powered, the light won't go on, in which case nothing will go through it. Another thing to do to troubleshoot your instrument is to make sure, once again, that your instrument and your amplifier are plugged in. And last but not least, if you're using a power source to power each of your pedals, make sure that those are all plugged into the proper outlet. Okay? So in a nutshell, that's what hooking your pedals up is about. And what that leads us to then is the effects loop. Now, in the effects loop, typically non-gain oriented effects are used. That would mean no distortion through there. You can try it for yourself, but what I would suggest is have your amp on a low volume when you do that so that you don't blow out your amp or harm it in any way. The effects loop then would lead to effects like a delay or a chorus or any pitch shifting effects such as a harmonizer or an octaver or things like that, maybe a guitar synth. So those effects would typically go into the back, and the reason that I like to use the effects loop is that I feel that it mellows the tone of the effects, and it kind of mellows the effect overall. So like a delay, you'll notice if it goes into the front of your amp, has a tendency to really have a serious repeat to it, whereas if it goes in through the back or the effects loop, you'll find that it will meld with the tone of the amp better. Okay, so here's how this works. We need, on the back of your amplifier, we have an effects loop. So in the effects loop, you'll see a marking called send and return. So return is like an input, and the send is like an output. So it's sending a signal out, which then needs to go in somewhere, and the signal that comes out then needs to return somewhere. So the way that an effects loop works is if we have an input of our effects, that needs to go from the send back to the effects, and then once it goes through, it will follow this wire out, follow through our effects chain, and then come back around, and from the output of the effects, we need to return it. And what happens then is we create a loop. Okay? So, with that said, Then the only thing remaining to do is to plug your guitar back into the front of the amp where you would normally plug in. Last but not least, in an effects loop, some effects loops will have a knob that allows you to control the mix of the effect, meaning how much of the effect is actually being added in from the effects pedals. Okay? So the last thing remaining then is pedal order. The pedal order will affect the sound of the overall tone. Whether you have a distortion in front of a chorus or in back of a chorus, or a delay in front of the chorus or in back of the chorus, it's going to affect the tone in different ways. Typically, a distortion effect will come later in the line so that it's not distorting each pedal as it moves down the line, because as each effect flows from one to the next, it's actually adding the effect to the next effect. So you're going to want to limit how much distortion that's not the actual distortion you want to hear comes out of your amp. If you put your distortion too early, you'll affect all of the effects and it will come out sounding kind of ratty. So you want to think about the placement of where each of your things go and try different configurations. There's a million places to find your standard setup, including on reallylearnguitar.com. There's some standard and typical ways that people set those up, and you can look at those on the free tutorial chapter. So have some fun hooking up your pedals and turning knobs, and don't forget to play guitar in all this, and I will see you later.